Michael was patrolling the store for about an hour, the hum of the lights above barely registering as background noise. It was one of those days where everything seemed routine. People coming and going, pushing carts, browsing aisles. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then he saw her, and for the first time that day, he paused. She couldn't have been more than 11 or 12. A slender black girl, wearing a hoodie that seemed too large for her frame, with a backpack slung over one shoulder. Something about the way she moved caught his eye. But it was the way she glanced around. Too quick, too careful. He's been on the force long enough to recognize that kind of behavior. She wasn't just browsing. She was up to something. Michael continued his patrol, keeping her on his peripheral vision while acting like he wasn't paying attention. He's learned over the years that if you give someone too much attention, they'll either get spooked or sloppy. And this one? She was cautious, like she'd done this before. Her movements were too deliberate. She'd stop at one shelf, glance over her shoulder, then move to another like she was making sure no one was watching. Michael could feel it in his gut. She was about to do something that would land her in trouble. He approached the aisle she was in, slowly, pretending to look at some random items, but his eyes were trained on her. She kept fiddling with her phone, occasionally glancing up, as if the device was a shield or an excuse for being in the store too long without buying anything. Then she moved faster. She tucked something into her backpack, quick as a flash, and began heading toward the exit. Michael's instincts kicked in, and he knew he had to stop her before she made it outside. But it wasn't just about stopping her for shoplifting. There was something more intense about this girl. The way she carried herself, the tension in her step. It was like she was running from something bigger than just getting caught with stolen goods. Michael followed her, keeping a distance at first, but as she neared the doors, he picked up his pace. It was at this moment that the girl ran off. Not like someone who'd just stolen a piece of candy or makeup. She was running like her life depended on it. Like if she was caught, everything she feared would come crashing down. It wasn't just about the act of shoplifting anymore. It was about survival. Or at least that's how she acted. Michael immediately took off after her, his boots thudding hard against the tiled floor. She darted through the aisles, her backpack bouncing wildly as she weaved in and out of other shoppers, nearly knocking over a few of them. Michael shouted again for her to stop, but his words were just echoes behind her. She didn't even glance back. He radioed for backup, though he doubted they'd get here in time. This girl was fast. She pushed past the sliding doors, hitting the sidewalk outside the store like a sprinter at the starting block. Michael followed her into the parking lot, his breath coming in hard bursts as he tried to keep pace. She cut between cars, her feet barely touching the ground. Michael's heart pounded, both from exertion and something else, a growing sense of unease. What was she so scared of? Shoplifting is a crime, but the way she was running, you'd think he was chasing her for something far worse. Michael pushed that thought aside, focusing on closing the gap between them. He was gaining on her, but every time he thought he had her, she'd change direction, ducking between parked cars and leaping over curbs with a level of agility that made him wonder if she'd been in situations like this before. Then, just as she reached the edge of the parking lot, her foot slipped on a patch of gravel. For a split second, she stumbled, her arms flailing to keep her balance. Michael lunged forward, grabbing her by the arm, pulling her back toward him.
"Stop,"
he said, tightening his grip as she struggled, kicking and thrashing. Her strength surprised Michael. She was small, but in that moment, it felt like she had the power of someone twice her size, fueled by raw fear.
"Let me go!"
she screamed, her voice cracking. Michael tried to get her to calm down, but it was like she couldn't even hear him. She kept fighting, twisting her body, trying to break free. For a moment, he thought she might actually slip out of his grasp, but he held on.
"Calm down,"
Michael said again, this time more forcefully.
"You're making it worse for yourself."
But she wasn't listening. Her breathing was erratic, her chest heaving like she'd just run a marathon. Her eyes darted around the parking lot as if she was still looking for an escape. As Michael held onto her arm, he could feel her whole body trembling. The fight had gone out of her, but there was still a tightness in the way she carried herself. It was like she wasn't really here, like her mind was miles away, stuck in whatever fear had pushed her to run like that. Michael's grip loosened a bit.
What's your name?
He asked, his voice more gentle now that the adrenaline of the chase had subsided. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes were glued to the ground, the oversized hoodie swallowing her small frame as she pulled it tighter around herself. Finally, in a barely audible whisper, she spoke.
Jada.
I need to see what you took.
Michael said. Her body tensed again. It was subtle, but Michael noticed it. She hesitated before unzipping her backpack with shaky hands. She reached inside, her movements slow and deliberate, and pulled out what looked like a small stuffed animal, a bear. A little worn around the edges, some food, and a box of tampons. Nothing of great value, at least not monetarily. Just simple provisions. Michael frowned, confused. This was it? She'd run like her life depended on stealing this? He knelt down to her level, careful not to startle her, and spoke softly.
Why did you take these, Jada?
Jada's eyes met with Michael, and for the first time, he saw the full weight of what she was carrying. It wasn't just fear of getting caught. It was deeper, something that had been building inside her for a long time. Her lips trembled as she tried to form the words, and when she finally spoke, her voice cracked with raw emotion.
I didn't have a choice. I'm hungry, and I really need these.
She whispered, her voice fragile like glass on the verge of shattering.
I need it.
Michael shook his head, trying to make sense of it.
Need a teddy bear? Why?
Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back, clenching her fists as if she could somehow hold herself together by sheer willpower.
My little brother, he's been in the hospital for weeks. He's scared. He's all alone in there, and he doesn't have anyone. No one comes to see him. I'm the only one who visits, but I can't stay with him all the time. He used to have a bear just like this one, but it got lost. He asks for it every time I go, but I can't get it back, and he's so scared.
Her voice broke then, the tears finally spilling over. She tried to wipe them away, but more kept coming.
I just wanted him to have something to hold, something that makes him feel safe. I know I shouldn't have stolen it. I know it was wrong, but I didn't know what else to do. I don't have any money. I just needed him to have it.
Michael swallowed hard, his throat tightening in a way he wasn't prepared for. He looked at the stuffed bear and snacks in her hands, and then back at her tear-streaked face. All the pieces began to fall into place. The desperation, the fear in her eyes, the way she'd run like her life depended on it. In her mind, it probably did. It wasn't just about the items. It was about survival and love, about trying to protect her little brother and herself in the only way she knew how. She was just a kid herself, and yet here she was, bearing the weight of something no kid should have to carry. Michael stood there, speechless, trying to process everything. His training had taught him how to handle situations like this, how to stay detached, how to remain professional. But standing here, looking at this girl, he couldn't stop the emotions that were bubbling up inside him. His chest felt heavy, like something was pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. Jada was sobbing now, her small frame shaking as she hugged the bear close to her chest.
I just wanted to help us,
she said between sobs.
I didn't mean for it to go this far.
And then, before Michael could stop himself, he felt the tears welling up in my own eyes. He hadn't cried on the job in years, not since his first year on the force, when he'd seen things that no amount of training could prepare you for. But something about this broke him. Michael looked down at her, and in that moment, she wasn't just some kid who'd committed a crime. She was a sister, trying to do whatever she could to protect her brother, even if it meant breaking the law. She wasn't some hardened criminal. She was scared. Michael turned away for a moment, trying to collect himself, But it was too late. The tears were already streaming down his face. He didn't know how to handle it, didn't know how to shift away what he was feeling. His chest ached with empathy and sorrow, and it took everything in him not to break down completely right there in the parking lot. He took a deep breath, wiped his eyes, and turned back to her.
I'm so sorry, Jada.
He whispered, his voice thick with emotion.
I'm sorry you've had to go through this.
Jada looked up at him, her tear-filled eyes filled with confusion, like she couldn't believe what was happening. Michael had to make this right. He couldn't erase what she'd done, and couldn't change the fact that she was still in trouble. But he could see now that this wasn't just about the law. This was about understanding, about seeing the person behind the action. He took a deep breath and reached for his radio, my voice barely steady as I called off the backup. This was more than a simple arrest. It was a moment where two lives, two very different paths, crossed in a way neither of them had expected. And standing there, he realized that sometimes the lines between right and wrong aren't as clear as they seem.
Jada, please listen to me.
Michael said softly.
I'm not going to take you to jail, but I need to understand more about what's going on. Can you tell me more about your brother? Where is he? What's his name?
She wiped her face, trying to stop her tears, but they kept coming.
His name is Malik. He's 6. He's in the hospital because he has leukemia. He's been there for a while now. I'm the only one who visits him. My mom, she's not really around.
Michael's heart sank deeper. A 6-year-old in the hospital, battling cancer. And Jada, at just 12, carrying the weight of being both sister and caretaker. No wonder she was desperate. No wonder she'd do anything to comfort her brother, even if it meant stealing a simple toy.
Where's your mom, Jada?
Michael asked gently, though he could already tell the answer wouldn't be good. She sniffed and looked away.
She's with her boyfriend most of the time. She's never home. She drinks a lot. She hasn't seen Malik in weeks. It's just me and him now.
He didn't know what to say. The anger Michael felt wasn't for Jada. It was for the situation she was in, for the adults who were supposed to protect her and Malik but had failed. She was just a kid, forced to grow up too fast, doing the best she could with what little she had. Michael took a deep breath, trying to figure out the next step. He couldn't just let her walk away, but he couldn't throw her into more trouble either. He needed to find a way to help her without making things worse.
Okay, Jada. I'm going to take you to see your brother.
He said, making the decision on the spot.
But we need to talk about what's going to happen next. You can't keep doing things like this, even if your heart's in the right place. Do you understand?
Her eyes widened in surprise.
You're not taking me to jail?
He shook his head.
No, I'm not. But we're going to figure this out together. I'm going to help you. We'll figure out a way for you to take care of your brother without getting into trouble.
She nodded, fresh tears forming in her eyes. But this time, they weren't just from fear. She was relieved. The hospital wasn't far, just a short drive. As they rode in silence, Michael made a few phone calls. First, to his sergeant, explaining the situation. He knew this wasn't protocol, but sometimes the rules had to bend when there was something more important at stake. Then, he called a social worker he knew from another case, told her about Jada and Malik, about their situation, and asked if she could meet us at the hospital. When they arrived, Jada led the way to Malik's room. He was asleep, his small body looking even smaller in the hospital bed, hooked up to tubes and monitors. The stuffed bear was still clutched tightly in Jada's arms, and he could see her fighting the urge to wake him up, to give him the bear right then and there. Instead, she sat quietly by his bedside, her hand gently brushing his cheek. The love she had for him was obvious, and it hurt to think about the challenges they were facing together, alone. While Jada sat with Malik, Michael waited in the hallway for the social worker. It wasn't long before she arrived, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a calm presence. He filled her in on the details, and she agreed to talk with Jada to see how she could help. When Jada came out of the room, Michael introduced her to the social worker. They talked for a long time, Jada explaining everything, the hospital bills piling up, her mother's absence, the pressure she felt trying to be there for Malik when she didn't know how much longer he had. The social worker listened carefully, her eyes soft with understanding. She promised Jada that she'd do everything she could to help find ways to support Malik in the hospital, looking into programs that could assist Jada financially, and, most importantly, ensuring Jada wouldn't have to handle this all on her own. Over the next few weeks, Michael kept in touch with Jada. He checked in on her and Malik, visited the hospital when he could, and made sure the social worker was following up with the resources she'd promised. He couldn't erase what had happened, but he could make sure Jada knew she wasn't alone anymore. One afternoon, when Michael visited, Jada gave him a shy smile as she greeted him at the hospital entrance.
Malik wants to say thank you,
She said, leading him to his room. Inside, Malik was sitting up, the stuffed bear now a permanent fixture by his side. He grinned up at Michael, his eyes bright despite the tiredness in them.
Thank you for helping my sister,
He said softly. Michael knelt beside him, smiling.
You've got a pretty amazing sister, Malik. She loves you more than anything.
He nodded, squeezing the bear.
I know.
As he stood up to leave, Jada caught his arm.
Thank you.
She whispered, her voice thick with emotion.
You saved us.
Michael shook his own head in turn.
No, Jada, you saved yourselves. I just helped you see that you didn't have to do it alone.
And as he walked out of that hospital room, he knew that Jada and Malik would be okay. They had a long road ahead, but they wouldn't be facing it without support anymore. And in his heart, he felt lighter, knowing he had done more than just uphold the law. Their story had shaken something inside him. A part of him hadn't realized he had gone numb after years on the force. It reminded him why he had signed up for this job in the first place. Not just to uphold the law, but to protect, to serve, to make a difference where it mattered most. A few days later, Michael decided to check in one more time. He hadn't planned on staying long, just enough to see how they were doing. When he arrived, Jada was sitting in the hospital lobby, her eyes lighting up when she saw me.
Hey!
She said, standing up quickly.
Malik's doing better today. They said he might be able to go home soon.
That's great news.
He replied, genuinely relieved. Malik had been through so much, and hearing that he was stable again brought a wave of relief. She strained with the straps of her backpack, the same one she had the day he arrested her.
I've been meaning to tell you.
She started, her voice low.
The social workers have been making sure we are cared for. We can eat real food now. The social worker really is helping us out.
That's amazing, Jada.
Michael said, smiling.
I knew you'd figure things out.
She nodded, her smile small but real.
I'm just so happy they will be able to help with Malik's medical bills now, and I won't have to steal anything again.
Her voice trailed off, but he knew what she meant. He stood there for a moment, letting her words sink in. This girl, who had once been so desperate, was finding her own strength. She was learning how to stand on her own, how to fight for herself and her brother without breaking the law.
You're doing great, Jada.
Michael said, feeling a surge of pride for this almost teenager who had been through more than most adults.
I'm proud of you.
Her eyes glistened for a moment, but she blinked away the tears.
I wouldn't have made it without you.
She admitted quietly. Jada gave him a small smile, and I could see the weight she carried wasn't as crushing as it had been before. She was still standing, and so was Malik. They'd keep standing, together. Before he left, Malik waved at him from his bed, the stuffed bear still tucked under his arm.
Make sure you come visit again soon,
He called out, his voice full of hope. I will, Michael promised, knowing he'd keep that vow. This wasn't just another case anymore. They weren't just a file on my desk or a report in the system. Jada and Malik reminded him that even in the darkest situations, a little kindness and support can make all the difference.